Transgender. Okay, well, this is a lot of information. Let's go directly to the ones who identify as trans to get a better understanding of where to start. Let's start here.
The most important things that you can kind of do to learn is well, obviously ask a trans person nicely in a comfortable way, and if they tell you about it, that's great. If they don't tell you about it and they give you some resources, that's great. If they're just kind of I don't want to talk about that right now, that's perfectly fine too, because we're lucky now, especially that there are resources now about what it's like there's websites, and you were saying, there's YouTube channels, and I mean, not all of them are even serious. I watch Sam Collins, who's a trans YouTuber, and he makes funny videos, and they comment on the trans experience in a good way, and they're kind of educational. I feel the best thing that you can do is read or listen or watch something about the trans experience, and then talk to someone who is trans if they're comfortable with talking to you, and checking your sources, I guess. If you're trying to learn about trans people and you read an article written by someone who is not trans, or famously has anti-trans views, then maybe you should evaluate what source you're reading from and read from another source and compare,
Yeah, multiple sources. And I was going to say with the YouTube videos, you saying Sam Collins, he talks about YouTubers that are definitely not. They themselves are trans, but they are not friendly to the trans community by any means. Yeah. They just go on about, stuff that is so the gatekeeping again, where they gatekeep of well, if you're not doing this, this, and this, if you're not actively trying to get the surgery, if you're not actively trying to do this or that or whatever, then you're not actually trans, you're just mentally ill. And it's okay, well, that's not true. So, it, like you say, the multiple sources thing is great, because it's okay, well, if there's one person saying that's trans, maybe I go on the flip side and listen to both sides, rather than just let yourself go through that pipeline of the algorithm says, oh, you watched this video, here's 12 more like it.
Wow, there's so much to learn, especially making sure we're grabbing information from the right sources. All right, let's move on.
I'm Oliver. I am 16 years old, and I am trans masculine. When I first came out, when I was as queer, a few years prior, I never really thought about being trans or the concept of transgenderism. But when I started getting older and I started to delve more into the queer community, I started learning about transgenderism more and more. I was something's a little bit off with how I express myself, being a girl just never felt right, and it feels weird to say it now as well. It was this build up over time, and then I was just well, I can try out using they them pronouns and see how I like it. And from there, as soon as I realized I didn't want to be referred to with she her pronouns or as a girl, I just was kind of yeah, I think I'm a boy, on the inside. I have plenty of stories that I look back now and I was oh, so I was just trans the whole time. Or I hated the idea of puberty, and I hated the idea of growing up, and I hated my body as well. When I came out to my parents as trans, it was this weight had been lifted from my shoulders. And I'm very lucky that they were accepting and they were very accepting. People were starting to finally like know like me like as Oliver and not as like kind of the front that I'd been putting up all my life. Like it finally felt like I was being open and honest with everybody. Just it was like this really beautiful thing that like I don't even know that I can express in words.
It's really important to have support from friends and family. Let's hear from someone else next.
My name's Sarah Jade Woodhouse. I'm 56 years old. I identify as a cis variant woman. I have always known throughout my life, like from the time I was like 4 years old, and people started breaking off into like boy groups and girl groups. I always knew there was something different, but this was the 60s or 70s, and I was in small town Salem, Utah, so the word trans anything was not in my vocabulary. The worst part was watching my then spouse, my then wife, start to kind of feel like somehow she was responsible for whatever was going on, and I was like, I just couldn't have that happen. She knew something was wrong. I knew she would know something was wrong, and it took a long time for me to just kind of, since I didn't have the words, I just told her that I felt like I wanted to be like her. And that was a hard conversation. Initially, my coming out to my family seemed pretty good, right? They all said that it didn't matter to them. They were always going to love me no matter what, kind of a thing. But it took time to find out that wasn't, that it was all of this up front, but very different behind the scenes. And my mom stopped me as I tried to explain it. She stopped me about like mid-sentence. She goes, does this have anything to do with your friend James? I had a friend who I'd met through a film, James, and he and I would hang out a lot together, and I was like, James, and then it clicked. She thought I was gay. I'm like, well, no, James is straight. This has nothing to do with James, but I do like men, but there's more. And then I went on. But she could never wrap her head around the fact that I couldn't just be gay. She goes, I don't understand why you have to dress in women's clothing and all this other stuff. Why can't you just be gay? And I'm like, well, because I'm not gay. And my dad, now I was raised LDS, as I said before. And my dad was a Mormon bishop. Well, he served in the bishopric. He was a bishop. He served on the state council. So he was very, very active LDS person. And he said, well, you just need to pray, pay your tithing, go to church, and everything will take care of itself. That was his answer. I said, I don't think it's going to work out that way. But he also didn't disown me, said he still loved me.
Sarah's great. Let's keep going.
Milo Johansson is my name. I'm 28 years old, and I am a trans man. I use he, him pronouns. Gosh, when did I start transitioning? Probably like 2019-ish. It's been a while now. I know growing up, my parents were both pretty, we grew up very Mormon, and my older brother came out as gay, and that alone was like quite the shock to the family. It was kind of a big deal in a way that a lot changed. We started pulling away from the church a little bit, especially my mom, because my mom was like, well, I love you regardless, but there still was a lot of, I could tell from everyone in the family, even myself, we were kind of like, okay, well, you're gay, you can go do that in the corner. That was way before like the internet was very big. That was before even cell phones and stuff. So I could see it in him that he was very isolated in just being gay. And that kind of was an experience for me where I started going like, well, gosh, if it's that hard for him to just be gay, then I must stay away from all of that. Especially because I could see at schools, he had to move schools all the time. He got bullied, he got jumped, he got beat up for it. So I was terrified. Part of the reason I transitioned so late in life was because I just didn't want to think about it. I hid a lot of that away, but it became harder and harder because I realized I was bisexual, and that alone I was kind of like, that's also scary. Like, I'm like, well, now am I confused? And like, are people going to hate me like halfway less? Like, what's the deal with that? The first person I came out to was my best friend, who actually lives overseas. I was listening to some song that was like some YouTube recommended thing, and it was super cheesy and weird, but it basically had a female character talking to a male character. When I was listening to the song, I kind of had this weird, like, I just feel like I identified more with the male voice speaking, and I kind of started thinking about, well, why in a lot of these types of duet songs do I feel like I would rather sing the male part, or I feel more like that side of the thing, that side of things. And like I said, I didn't want to go into my feelings that day, but I started to, and I remember I immediately started crying because I didn't even think of the word like trans, but you're just never taught it. So I don't even think I thought the word at first. I think I just kind of had the feeling of like, oh God, what if this is what I am? And that was kind of my epiphany moment. And from there I started doing a little bit more research, and lo and behold, that's what it was. So I, eventually gone on this journey where I started doing the things that I thought I was supposed to do to try to make myself feel better. And as internet and cell phones and stuff started becoming more popular, more and more media kind of either demonized it, or I believed that partially trans women were kind of the only trans you could be, because that's the most of what I saw. I really rarely ever saw trans men anywhere. And if I did, it was not a pretty picture. Like, they demonized it so bad. So it took me years. I got a significant other. I did get pregnant at an early age, but I still was like, well, this is what I'm physically supposed to do, I guess. Like, I'm going through the motions here. But after a while, it just became something that, like I said, I started hiding myself away so much that it was kind of do or die. Like, I was like, I'm either going to sit in my room alone for the rest of my life and wither away, or I can pull myself up by my bootstraps, figure out what's going on, and, take care of myself and my child and start moving forward, even if it is terrifying. Yeah. Raising a kid as a transgender man is difficult, to say the least. I think that at home it's easy and fine, and around the people that obviously know, it doesn't feel as I'm not sure what word to use other than just out in public. A lot of people just automatically assume, because unfortunately you don't see a lot of dads out with just their kid, and that's just how it is sometimes. So a lot of people automatically assume that's a mother and their child, which I personally do still like. My child still calls me mom. I don't get offended by that because I am mom, for all intents and purposes. But out in public, it's definitely, it just makes people assume, and it's not something that usually bothers me, but if I get caught in a conversation with someone, it's not very comfortable because they start assuming things and saying things that are like, oh, as their mother, and I'm like, well, you see, yes, but also no. Like, it does make that a little bit harder, and on top of it, it's kind of scary with a lot of like the laws in certain places being passed, as parents are having their children taken away for being trans. And I always joke about like over my dead body, but I'm like, that's a little too real sometimes, so it's not super ideal out in public, for sure.
Let's learn about dysphoria and the study behind it. Let's see. This first website we found, Dr. J. Graham Thiessen, obstetrician, gynecologist. They are experiencing dysphoria because the gender they feel on the inside does not match their external sex. And the goal of treatment like hormone therapy and surgery is to help their body more closely match where their brain already is. And if we scroll down more, there's another quote. I think gender is as unique and varied as every other trait we have. Just like we all have different colored eyes, there are genetic variations that make you, you. Easy enough to understand. This next website mentions hormone therapy improves transgender patients' quality of life by having a positive effect on mood and reduce depression in individuals. Hormone therapy can save lives, and it plays a huge helpful role in those suffering from gender dysphoria. Let's hear how Sarah describes dysphoria.
You know, I've had people ask me this question so many times, and it's like, it's hard. I think I'm explaining it to them, but I still think it's hard for people to grasp. I remember early on in my transition, I had a lot of drag friends, which I think a lot of trans people end up having a lot of drag friends. I guess just because that's the first community we kind of go to, a lot of us, right? Because it's like, oh, here's some people. They may not totally be my experience because I'm definitely not a drag person. I was at a D's on somewhere here in town. I think they called it Freaky D's. They used to call it Freaky D's because all the freaks hanged out there. But and I was at breakfast something with two of my drag guy friends, and they were sitting at the table, and one of the guys said, "So, I don't get it." And he's a gay man, but he was like, "So I don't understand. What is the difference between what I do and what you do? Why are we different?" kind of a thing. And I told him, I said, "Well, do you want to get rid of your penis?" They said, "No, I love my penis." And I'm like, that's the difference. You don't want to get rid of it. To me, I absolutely abhor having it to the point that if I could stand the pain, I would have sliced it off myself a long time ago. It doesn't belong. To me, it is a foreign piece of flesh, much like a deformity or a birth defect, that I want to get rid of completely. So that was the second time that I kind of like tried to define this. And he got it at that point. But the closest approximation I can even put it is if you are a cis person and your brain matches your body, your sex organs, your genitalia, everything. If you were to take who you are today and shove you into the body of the opposite sex tomorrow. Now, some people might, especially some men might think, hallelujah, that's fun, right? But that would last all of maybe half a day, if that, before you started realizing that there's so much more that goes in that. You got to go to the women's restroom. You got to go through women's functions and things and all of that about your body. Same with trans. If you're a cis man or a cis woman, and I put you in the body of a man tomorrow, the fascination of it would last maybe a day before it would become hell to you. Then you take that and you amplify that, but by however many years this trans person has been alive, imagine having to live that way for a year, 5 years, 15 years, 20 years, 40 years, 50 years. How long would it be before you would ultimately say, I can't live this way anymore? And either find a way to change back or end your life, which, let's face it, trans youth suicide rate is 50%. I don't think that hits people hard enough. 50% means that on average, if you meet two trans people, one's going to be dead. It's not much better for trans adults. It's 48%. And the most recent statistics is 82% of us have attempted suicide. That's as close as I can get. That's as much as I can say to anybody that is questioning. What's it like to suffer dysphoria? Well, it's life-threatening is what it's like. It's killing most of us, if not all of us, eventually.
We should all be aware of the statistics. Let that sink in.
The protections weren't really there. The knowledge of transness wasn't really there. And now, today, right, there's lots of freedoms we enjoy that we didn't back then, but there's still freedoms we don't have, and there's freedoms that are being taken away every day.
Before I came out as trans or like queer in general, I didn't know anything about like the government or politics, and I kind of just kept myself away from it. But it sucks now that like trans rights are like kind of on the line right now. That like I've kind of had to like force myself to become an adult, at least like politics wise, really fast. Like at the beginning of this year, I spoke to the House of Representatives during a meeting, and I don't know, I just thought when I was doing it and after I did it, and some people saw me on the news, like it's kind of sad that like I'm 16, I would much rather be like reading or playing video games than going out to the Capitol and talking to people about
Like
how,
fighting for your life, basically.
yeah, just talking about I'm like a normal person and that they don't need to interfere with, you know, the way that my life is headed. So it's definitely not all good for me. Like it's good in terms of like internally things are better, but like externally, like I wouldn't say that I'm like exempt from like, I don't know, just like it's hard to say.
It's like the fire moved from inside to outside.
Yes, yeah.
Rather than burning to death, you're now trying to find a way to navigate through fire so that you don't catch again. Like
yeah, definitely.
We're still such a long ways off from and I feel like the gay movement went through this too, right? There was a time, if you look at gay rights as they moved through their revolution phase to all of a sudden now they're in all of the news and the media, right? And then all of a sudden it starts to settle down to where they're being featured in films and stuff, but it's still all about your gayness, right? Yeah. And now you're starting to hear, I think it was like maybe 5 years ago or so that I heard a lot of gay celebrities or performers or whatever saying, I'm more than just gay, right? And we're a far ways off, I think, to that phase where we suddenly become, we're more than just trans, right? There's more to us than my transness. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting the sense of you guys are still filling out there.
Yeah.
I feel it every day.
Well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't help that, like you say, like in shows and stuff, a lot of the time that there's a character that's trans, it's kind of like that's their entire identity. Yeah. They don't write anything else about them.
Now that we've heard about how transitioning has changed over the years, here's Oliver talking on ways to help dysphoria.
Wearing baggy clothes, getting your hair cut, or trying out different hairstyles, that really makes a really big difference. Sometimes people do specific like contour makeup to make themselves appear more masculine or feminine or whatever, which really helped me as well. Seeking out medical treatment for, like if you're trans masc and you don't like having a period and it makes you dysphoric, like going on birth control or like talking to your doctor about medications that can stop your period, that helps a lot. It helps a ton. And then if you're able to get, like if you have access to it, going on hormone replacement therapy or puberty blockers is another really one that makes a really big difference if you have dysphoria. So
Those are some very helpful ways on how to ease dysphoria. Let's hear about how important it is to have LGBTQ+ friendly spaces.
I would say that it's really important to have like LGBT spaces because, like especially like with trans people, I feel like now like trans people are like super marginalized, and they, from my experience at least, like my friends have had a harder time like meeting people and talking to people, especially people who aren't trans. Like, I guess they just feel like the people who aren't trans just feel like they can't talk to us at all, or like they have like no, like it's kind of like still on the outskirts a little bit. But just like having a space where like you can talk like with other trans people is just so important, because like it's like validating, because like people see you and people hear you and you can talk about your problems and someone's like, oh, I experienced the same thing, or someone's like, oh, I experienced that and this is how I dealt with it, or like here's some advice that may be helpful to you if they're asking for advice. I just think like if I like, at least for me, if I never went to like an LGBT space when I was younger or from here on out, like it just feels like so alone, because I don't know, as much as sometimes I don't feel like it, there is like a certain joy in being trans, I think. So just like not being able to like share that with someone else who like gets that, that's difficult. And then it's even more difficult when nobody can like relate to your specific experiences either.
Yeah.
So
It's, I think the more I listen to that too, it's like if the only group of people you are able to reach out with and interact with are people just like you, then we start to get just this very narrow view
It's the echo chambers.
of what
Yeah.
trans isness is, right?
Yeah.
Here's a few trans figures throughout history. Reed Erickson, an American trans man best known for his philanthropy work in the 1960s. Bella Ramsey, the co-star of The Last of Us, identifies as non-binary. Sam Collins, a trans YouTuber that comments on trans media. Jemmy Dodger, another trans YouTuber who's talked on various trans-related topics in media. Roberta Cal, a trans woman who was a thrilling pilot and auto racer in the 1950s. Elliot Page, a well-known actor who recently came out as transgender, did an article with Time. That says, increased social acceptance has led to more young people describing themselves as trans. 1.8% of Gen Z, compared to 0.2% of boomers, according to a recent Gallup poll. One last website on how LGBTQ+ rights have changed 50 years since Stonewall is saying the inspired generations of activists and jurists are working together to overcome legal obstructions to equality. we're seeing more progression, courage, and joy as the years carry on.
What I want the general public, I guess, to know about trans people is, especially parents of trans people, is that trans people are just, they're people. They're like normal people. Like, they have like a different experience than you, but that doesn't mean that they're worlds apart from you. Like, we want to be accepted by society, and we want to have friends, and most of us like socializing and like going out, and we watch all the same TV shows that you do, and we watch all the same, like, and we listen to all the same music that you do. We just want to be treated like how you would treat a normal person, you know? Like, we don't ask for much, I guess. We just ask to be respected.
The message here today is the trans community needs to have equal rights.